We all grow up with ideas about what happens after death, some comforting, some frightening, some never really questioned. But here's the thing, most of us never ask where those ideas actually come from. Are they all in the Bible? Did the earliest believers imagine the same afterlife we do today? Or did these ideas take shape, slowly? In this episode, we'll start from the images most people know, then go back to the earliest texts. We'll follow the story step by step, from the world of the dead, to judgment, to eternity. I'm Alex, and I'll be your historian for this journey. When we think about hell today, most of us see the same images: fire, punishment, levels of suffering, and when we think about heaven, we imagine light, order, souls rising closer and closer to God. These images feel ancient, biblical, almost timeless, but most of them come from much later, from a world shaped by medieval imagination. More than 700 years ago, a poet named the Divine Comedy described a journey through hell, purgatory, and heaven. Each sin had its punishment. Each soul had its place. Each destiny was clearly mapped. Over time, those images escaped the poem. They entered paintings, sermons, collective memory. For many people, Dante did not just describe the afterlife, he defined it. And without realizing it, we inherited that picture. But here is the key question. Did the earliest believers imagine the afterlife the same way, or was their vision much quieter, much less defined? To find out, we have to go further back than Dante, to a time when the afterlife was not yet divided so clearly. Long before heaven had gates, and long before hell had fire, there was simply the world of the dead. In the First Temple period, roughly between the 10th and 6th centuries before Christ, the earliest biblical texts describe death in very different terms than we imagine today. Death did not lead to reward, and it did not lead to punishment. It led somewhere else, a place below, quiet, still, out of sight. Kings went there, servants went there, the righteous and the wicked. Not because they were the same, but because judgment had not yet come. This place had a name, Sheol. It was not a place of torture, and not a place of joy. It was a place of existence after life. That idea mattered, because at the same time, many surrounding cultures imagined death very differently. In ancient Egypt, only those who could pass judgment and afford proper rites hoped for a full life beyond death. In early Greek and Roman traditions, the afterlife was often reserved for heroes, or faded into shadows for most. In many pagan beliefs, immortality was rare, unequal, or not meant for everyone. But in early biblical thought, death was not annihilation. Something of the person remained. The dead were not erased, they were not dissolved, they were remembered. They could be mourned, spoken to, gathered with their ancestors, yet nothing happened there. No reward, no punishment, no resolution. That silence mattered too, because it introduced an idea that would never disappear, that death is not the end. Identity persists, memory continues, but justice waits. Sheol was not heaven, and it was not hell. It was something more unsettling, life after death, without an answer, and that unanswered waiting would slowly reshape everything that came next. As time passed, the idea of the afterlife did not disappear, it deepened. Between the 6th century before Christ and the 1st century of the current era, during what historians call the Second Temple period, a quiet distinction began to emerge. Not everyone would experience death in the same way. The dead still went to the same realm, but their experience would not be identical. For the righteous, death began to look less like silence and more like rest. The texts speak of being gathered to one's people, of peace, of closeness, of belonging. In later Jewish tradition, this state was given an image, Abraham's bosom, not a palace, not a throne, not a reward of gold or light, but a place of comfort, the righteous resting together, close to the patriarch, close to their origin, still waiting, but no longer alone. This was not heaven as later imagined. There were no levels, no choirs, no vision of God's glory, but there was something new, a moral distinction. The way one lived now mattered beyond death, and that idea would endure, because it answered a growing tension. If death is not the end, and if identity persists, then justice cannot remain forever unresolved. The rest of the righteous was not the final answer, but it was a promise. That goodness was remembered, that faithfulness was not lost, that waiting could still be meaningful. and from this quiet hope, the idea of heaven would slowly take shape. As hope took shape for the righteous, another question became impossible to avoid. What about those who did evil? During the Second Temple period, roughly between the 6th century before Christ and the 1st century of the current era, belief in the afterlife began to absorb a new idea: that actions had consequences beyond death. Not immediately, not always clearly, but eventually. The fate of the wicked was not imagined first as torture. It was imagined as loss, distance, separation, exclusion from rest. Warnings began to appear in the texts. Images meant to shake the listener. One of those images came from a real place, a valley just outside Jerusalem, the Valley of Hinnom. In earlier times, it had been associated with destruction, fire, and shame. By the time of Jesus, its name had become a symbol, not of a detailed afterlife, but of consequence. Fire was not described to entertain, it was described to warn. The message was simple: life mattered, choices mattered, and injustice did not dissolve with death. This was not yet hell as later imagined. There were no circles, no demons, no precise punishments, but something essential had entered the picture. Moral responsibility did not end at the grave. The wicked were not erased, but they were not at rest. They were remembered, not with comfort, but with judgment waiting. This idea completed a balance. If goodness could be remembered, then wrongdoing could not be ignored. And from this tension between rest and exclusion, the later idea of hell would slowly emerge. As ideas of rest and consequence took shape, a deeper tension appeared. What about those who were neither fully righteous nor fully wicked? Those who lived imperfect lives, who tried, who failed, who remained unfinished. By the early centuries of Christianity, roughly between the 2nd and 6th centuries of the current era, believers began to sense that death did not settle everything. Prayers for the dead became common, not for the damned, not for the saints, but for those in between. This suggested something radical, that the soul could still change after death, that justice might involve process, not just verdict. Over time, this intuition took shape as an idea, a state of waiting, of purification, of preparation, not punishment, not reward, but passage. Later centuries would give this idea a name: Purgatory. It was never imagined first as fire and torment. It was imagined as mercy with gravity, a space where flaws could be faced, where debts could be resolved, where the soul was not rejected, but not yet complete. This idea answered a very human question. If goodness matters, and justice matters, then what happens to ordinary people? Purgatory said, you are not lost, but you are not finished. And from this space in between, the architecture of the afterlife grew more complex, not harsher, but more human. For centuries, one question remained open: if souls continued after death, if rest existed for the righteous, if consequence awaited the wicked, if purification was possible in between, when would justice finally be complete? The answer appeared gradually. From late Jewish texts, and into early Christianity, roughly between the 2nd century before Christ and the 4th century of the current era, belief began to converge on a decisive moment. Not many judgments, not constant sorting, but one. The final judgment. A moment outside ordinary time, when history itself would be brought to account. The dead would rise, lives would be remembered, nothing would be forgotten. Images filled the imagination. Books opened, names read aloud, scales balanced. This was not about revenge, and not about fear alone. It was about meaning. That lives mattered. That suffering was seen. That injustice was not permanent. The final judgment did something essential. It delayed justice, but it did not abandon it. It allowed mercy to exist in the present, without denying accountability in the end. And for the first time, the afterlife gained an ending. Not an endless process, not an unresolved wait, but a conclusion. After this moment, nothing would remain undecided, and what followed that judgment would no longer change. After judgment, one final idea remained: not reward, not punishment, but permanence. From late antiquity onward, as Christian belief continued to mature, the afterlife was no longer imagined as movement, no more waiting, no more change, no more transition. What followed judgment was understood as eternity, a state without time. This is where heaven and hell fully became what most people imagine today, not events, but conditions, not journeys, but destinations. Eternity did not mean endless days, it meant no days at all, no becoming, no correcting, no return. What had been chosen, what had been shaped, what had been resolved, now remained. This idea was not meant to terrify, it was meant to give weight. That life mattered because it was not repeatable, that choices mattered because they were not reversible. Eternity closed the story, not because God stopped caring, but because justice, mercy, and meaning were believed to have finally met. And, with that, the afterlife was no longer unfinished. It was complete. At the beginning of this video we asked a simple question: where do our ideas of heaven and hell really come from? Not the images, not the flames or the choirs, but the ideas beneath them. What we've seen is this: they were not created all at once, they were not revealed as a finished system, they were assembled, piece by piece, across centuries, across fear, injustice, hope, and waiting. First came the belief that death is not the end, then the intuition that goodness should be remembered. Then, the fear that wrongdoing should matter. Then, the hope that unfinished lives might still be healed. Then the promise that justice would one day be complete. And finally, the idea that meaning itself requires an ending. Heaven and hell did not begin as places. They began as answers to human questions. What happens after death? Does justice matter? Is suffering seen? Does life have weight? Different eras answered differently, but each answer left a trace. And those traces are still with us. Not as doctrine, not as proof, but as inheritance. So whether one believes literally, symbolically, or not at all, these ideas remain powerful because they speak to something universal, that life matters, that choices matter, that meaning is not random. And perhaps that is why, after thousands of years, we are still asking the same questions, not to settle them forever, but to understand why they mattered so deeply in the first place. History isn't finished. Stay curious.